Some reporter once described it as a cradle between land and sea.
Our goal is to see the Ballona Wetlands properly restored as a tidal wetland, consistent with state law, policy, and voter initiative.
What you see behind me is the result of many, many years, almost 20 years of effort by grassroots environmental activists to save what remains of our coastal wetlands here on the west side of Los Angeles.
The area we're standing on has been designated an Ecological Reserve.
I am amazed. It's been such a long road and such a difficult one in many ways.
The Ballona Wetlands represents 1% of what's left of wetlands along the coast.
In the old days, whenever we found a wetland, we filled it in because it was unusable land.
It's the evolution of pioneers of the West.
And we didn't know then all of the values that wetlands provided to our society.
Over the years, the tide gates rusted out, and that made it possible for the water to come in, the salt water, and that made it possible for all the wildlife to return, and that made it possible for us to have the attention of the Coastal Commission, who stopped any idea of development at that time.
Voter initiative enacted the California Coastal Act in the early 1970s. And it put in place a program that's over 40 years old now that is designed to protect the coastline in California from development that is not consistent with the Coastal Act. One of the cornerstones of the Coastal Act is to protect, preserve, and restore coastal wetlands and tidelands.
This is probably one of the most well-studied wetland areas in California. This was originally a Mexican land grant area, Rancho La Ballona. But beginning in about the 1800s, humans really started to come into this area. The original indigenous people were pushed out, and we humans came in and began farming, draining the wetlands for farming, and little bit by little bit the wetlands started disappearing.
My son, Willie, when he was a little kid, used to come home and bring me lizards and frogs and big snakes, all from here. And I hadn't realized what an incredibly important habitat this was at all. I thought it was just empty fields.
The unstable and erratic nature of our seasonal flooding that we have here in California drove the politicians and the Army Corps of Engineers to come up with a solution. And the solution was to channelize our creeks and rivers and tributaries. Well, it stopped all the flooding, but they wiped out huge swatches of wetland habitat.
The original property was acquired by Howard Hughes back in the late 30s, early 1940s for filming.
When we got the word that he was going to die, we started thinking to ourselves, uh-oh, this is a development waiting to happen. And we were right.
High-rise offices, a regional shopping mall.
Not a few days after he was dead, the Sumo Corporation, his company, presented plans for an enormous development that would have demolished almost the entire wetland.
What they didn't realize was it was such precious habitat.
Some plans showed golf courses in the wetlands.
One of the things in negotiation that we negotiated for was the Freshwater Marsh, which is up at the corner of Lincoln and Jefferson. It was scheduled to be a senior citizen luxury housing complex and a golf course. I don't know how they were going to play golf because it's wetland and they would have ended up in mud.
In addition, there was a roadway running, like it was planned to run smack dab down the middle of the wetlands, would have cut it in half and would have further degraded the habitat.
We are the nonprofit that filed the first lawsuit to save all of the wetlands 35 years ago.
Gray Davis has played an important role in saving the Ballona Wetlands, not only when he made the switch, the land trade, so that we could do the freshwater marsh, but later when he became governor. It was because he was governor that we were able to have the state buy the Ballona Wetlands and ensure that it would never be developed.
McGuire Thomas came in the 1980s, in the late 1980s, and with the help of the councilwoman at the time, Ruth Galanter, sat down at the table with Ruth Lansford and the Friends and said, okay, well, what do you guys want? And I think that was the origins of things like the Freshwater Marsh, the Riparian Corridor, and Ballona Discovery Park, which we're standing in today.
One of the other conditions of our settlement agreement was what we called Discovery Park.
The park represents an equal partnership among a nonprofit, the Friends of Ballona Wetlands, a developer, Playa Vista, and an educational institution, Loyola Marymount University.
This park would be devoted to discovering what the wetland is and why it is and how it functions. And our education program is terrific.
And it helps them try to understand why wetlands and the oceans are so important to begin with. The rocks and the toyon, everything, that represents the mountains where when the rainfall comes, it comes down and washes through the watershed towards the ocean. And this is the city. It's called the urbanscape. This is where the kids coming through the park are taught how the runoff runs down the streets into the gutters and eventually makes its way to the ocean. It explains why it's important to not throw trash on the ground, and how pollutants get in and cause problems to the wetlands. The original property was just shy of 1,100 acres. In 2003, we sold about 600 of those acres to the state that are going to be permanently preserved as wetlands forever.
Dealing with bureaucracy has been incredibly complicated.
The Friends of the Ballona Wetlands, affectionately known as the Friends, weren't necessarily our friends. Like any real estate development, there are requirements that were put in place for us to do things for the environment.
The Friends did want a strong freshwater element because historically there is a freshwater element, especially in the winter when all the rains come in.
Over the years in working with them, I think that they've definitely become my friends and our friends.
We negotiated and we got the freshwater marsh, and we wanted to make sure it wasn't just a dumping basin for wastewater from the development.
We didn't look at those as, okay, we're going to do those, we're going to do those requirements and it stops there. We looked at those as a starting point and, let's see what we can do that's better than that.
So we created several conditions that were vital.
Playa Vista is not a real estate development project. Playa Vista is a civic project. It's a social project. It's about bringing the community together. It's about building a sustainable community.
Number one, it had to create better habitat than existed before. Number two, that habitat did have to be maintained in perpetuity. And number three, if that habitat proved to be incompatible when the salt marsh was restored, if there was some reason that it didn't work together the way it was supposed to, then it would have to be redesigned and developed until it was. It is beautiful. It's taken a lot of time to make it what it is, but we've done it.
I think it speaks well to the design of this marsh that we feel that we're now have reached all the goals and objectives that were in the permits and in the habitat mitigation and monitoring plan.
Ice plant, which is a well-known ornamental plant not native to the United States, covers large areas of the Ballona Wetlands. That'll have to be taken out as part of a restoration.
We started the dune restoration program about 25 years ago, and it was all done by volunteers with the guidance of the staff. We ripped out the ice plant, and when we did, plants that nobody knew were lying dormant under the surface began popping up, native plants. And that was a really exciting thing to know, that these plants hadn't just died, they were just waiting. And then other things happened that we didn't expect. We have managed to grow dune buckwheat, and it's expanding throughout, and we brought back the El Segundo blue butterfly. It breeds here, it lives here for the short lifespan it has.
To be able to bring back their habitat for them to live in and thrive is a big deal.
The Ballona Freshwater Wetlands is now providing some flood protection for the adjacent roads and for the community in general. It's providing a natural way to filter out pollutants from stormwater.
We actually have water that's entering the ocean cleaner than it's ever been from that particular area.
Over half of the plant species that are used here in our landscaping are native or drought tolerant.
It's also providing substantial wildlife habitat.
It is one of the most fertile, most important parts of our ecosystems.
This marsh has really succeeded far beyond what even the designers thought would be possible.
Organizations like the Friends of Ballona Wetlands are the voice that we rely on to give nature its place at the table.
Any little bit that we can save and bring back to some balance where we're having an influx of what used to be here is a good thing.
If we can restore Ballona Wetlands as it was intended to be restored by state law and policy, we will have a much richer natural environment, a greater number of species, higher abundance of species, habitat for rare, threatened, and endangered species, and just as importantly, educational and recreational opportunities for people.
Because ultimately, a healthy and resilient city is good for the planet and good for our own survival.